Hello, and welcome to CommonSensePolitics.tv. This is an article I found on cnsnews.com. In 1975, 57% of 18 to 34-year-olds lived with a spouse. In 2016, only 27% lives with a spouse. 4 decades ago, in the mid-1970s, young American adults in the 18 to 34 age bracket were far more likely to be married and living with a spouse than living in their parents' home. But that is no longer the case, according to a new study by the U.S. Census Bureau. There are now more young people living with their parents than in any other arrangement, says the Census Bureau study. The number one living arrangement today for Americans in the 18 to 34 age bracket, according to the Census Bureau, is to reside without a spouse in their parents' home. That is where you can now find 22.9 million 18 to 34-year-olds, compared to the 19.9 million who are married and live with their spouse. In 1975, according to Census Bureau data, 31.9 million Americans in the 18 to 34 age bracket were married and lived with their spouse. Back then, this was the most common living arrangement for that age bracket. Also in 1975, 14.7 million in the 18 to 34 age bracket lived in their parents' home. 6.1 million lived in an other arrangement, including with siblings, grandparents, other relatives, or unrelated roommates. 3.1 million lived alone, and 0.7 million cohabitated with an unmarried partner. Also in 2016, 15.6 million lived in an other arrangement. 9.2 million cohabitated with an unmarried partner, and 5.9 million lived alone. In 1975, when calculated as percentages according to the census numbers, 57% of 18 to 34-year-olds lived with a spouse, 26% lived in their parents' home, 11% lived in an other arrangement, 5% lived alone, and 1% lived with an unmarried partner. In 2016, 31% lived in their parents' home, 27% lived with their spouse, 21% lived in an other arrangement, 12% lived with an unmarried partner, and 8% lived alone. The rise in young adults living at home coincided with a decline in the economic status of young men. More young men are falling to the bottom of the income ladder, says the Census Bureau study. In 1975, only 25% of men, aged 25 to 34, had incomes of less than $30,000 per year. By 2016, that share rose to 41% of young men. Incomes for both years are in 2015 dollars. There are now more young women than young men with a college degree, whereas in 1975 educational attainment among young men outpaced that of women, says the study. Within the last 10 years, the breadth and speed of change in living arrangements have been tremendous, it says. In 2005, the majority of young people lived independently in their own household, either alone, with a spouse, or an unmarried partner, which was the predominant living arrangement in 35 states. By 2015, just a decade later, only 6 states had a majority of young people living independently. Thanks for watching and good night.